It's been 1 year since the war started, and the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza continues. The genocidal situation with over 40,000 people dead continues, shows no sign of ending. Every day you turn on the television and you see new footage, new images of horror, of children being killed, hospitals and schools being bombed, and it does seem as if the world is sitting quietly and allowing this to happen. Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan. It's been 1 year since the attack on Israel by Hamas and the Islamic Jihad triggered an Israeli invasion and attack on the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip. Since then, over 42,000 people, most of whom are women and children, have been killed in the Israeli bombing and attack. And the civilian population in Gaza is, according to the UN, on the brink of starvation. The war has expanded now with the savage bombing of southern Lebanon, South Beirut suburbs by the Israeli army. And there is now a fear of an even wider conflagration involving Iran, Yemen, and of course Israel and the United States, with all of Israel's allies. Joining me to discuss the war that's taken place over the last year, which is still going on, the terrible humanitarian catastrophe that has been visited upon the people of Palestine, and the prospects, even after all this bloodshed and violence and dislocation, the prospects for the Palestinian struggle and for the creation of an independent Palestine state, is Achin Vanaik, retired professor of Delhi University. You taught international relations there.
That's right.
You are also a leading member of Indians for Palestine, which is a solidarity group. It's important that I mention this to my viewers. You've been a long-time watcher of Israel-Palestine affairs, and you have also closely been analyzing India's evolving policy towards Israel and Palestine. Let me begin by asking you um, a somewhat provocative question. Given all that has happened over the past year, the savage, brutal destruction of Gaza, killing of over 40,000 people, uh, do you think that what Hamas did on October 7th, by cutting the fence that Israel had built, invading border areas, killing, by official accounts, something like 1,200 people, vast majority of whom were civilians, do you think what Hamas did has set the Palestinian struggle back, or has it created a new situation in which the Palestinian struggle may actually be able to advance in this very difficult moment?
Okay, the question you're asking me is that give us a sense of the positive side of the ledger and the negative side of the ledger.
Okay.
Let's start from the fact that an occupied people, and of course this is the longest running illegal occupation sustained by brutal forms of overt and covert violence over the last 150 years. And occupied people have the right to resist even with armed struggle, but of course they don't have the right to kill civilians. Israel, of course, has been doing that even before and all that here. So from one point of view, the Hamas and others have a right to hit, but not to kill civilians. But we have to separate this question from the other question of the strategic political consequences of that.
Right.
What are the positive side of the ledger, if you like? One is that for about 20 years, nobody was really bothered about the Palestinian question. Yes, Oslo was gone. Oslo was being violated regularly. Nobody bothered. Suddenly, it's come up, and now there's a greater recognition that you're not really going to have an enduring peace in that region or stability in that region unless you address the Palestinian question. The second thing that has happened is that this also sparked, at the level of civil society in many parts of the world, a very considerable source of support for the Palestinian struggle. And one thing that has been negatively affected for Israel is that the idea of this myth of the perpetual victimhood of Israel, Israel is suffering, this, that, etc., has also been dealt a serious blow. Zionism has been exposed to a very considerable extent as a racist and exclusivist ideology. Overall, strategically and politically, yes, it has been a setback for the Palestinian cause. The Israelis are using that as an excuse to carry out a genocidal campaign, which of course has made things much more difficult. And I say much more difficult because, quite apart from the horror of what's been done, incidentally, if you go by Lancet and you take into consideration those which have died or missing under the rubble, you're talking about close to 200,000 people, which is over 8% of the population of Israel. To give the Indian viewers some sense of what this means, it means over 10 crore people in India, if you use that standard, have been killed or injured.
But I think killed or injured, yeah.
That's right, killed or injured. But let's come to the question of the setback. Look at the response of the other countries in the world, whether in the West or United States. A lot of verbal dismay, a lot of talk about humanitarian crisis. Yes, another positive aspect is that the ICJ ruling is now indicated very clearly that this is it. But there's no mechanism for actually implementing the rulings or punishing Israel. How many sanctions and others have taken place? Who has stopped Israel from doing this? So yes, it has been a very, very serious setback to the Palestinian cause. But at the same time, the efforts and the desire of Israel to have their final solution is still not there. They still have huge problems. One way perhaps to look at this is to recognize that Israel is not only the only settler colonial apartheid state today. It's a settler colonial state which is different from the other two forms of settler colonial states. The first settler colonial states of Oceania and the New World, etc., eliminated the population effectively. The second, Algeria, Zimbabwe, South Africa, they had to leave, and you have, of course, the majority ruling. This one is not like either. The problem for Israel, even though it's trying, is that they cannot eliminate the Palestinian people. Although that, in a certain sense, what they're doing in Gaza and what they seem to trying to do incrementally is trying to move in that direction. But these are different times. Like, for example, they wanted to expel the people in Gaza. Egypt said no for its own reasons. Now they're saying that let's make it uninhabitable so that even at some time there is a ceasefire and some kind of governing structure, life will be so difficult that the Palestinians in Gaza will want to move. I'm not saying that's going to happen. If it stops, there'll be aid and so on. But yes, let me stop here. Overall, in strategic political terms, it is a serious setback in my view.
Right. In other words, you're saying in terms of sort of the morality and legal side, the killing of civilians under any circumstances is not acceptable.
Yes.
And it was unequivocally wrong for Hamas or others to have targeted civilians, taken them hostages, and so on and so forth, just as it is wrong and condemnable for the Israelis to be killing civilians in Gaza or anywhere else. So that,
yeah, I would just say there's also a distinction. An occupied people have the right to resist. An occupying force cannot talk about engaging in a war or killing. In other words, the occupying force cannot use either armed or peaceful means to continue and sustain that occupation. So there is a profound difference between the two. And this claim of Israel doing what it had to do in self-defense, although it's played up, is absolute nonsense. It's not acceptable.
Well, I guess what muddies the water is the fact that you have Israeli hostages who have been seized.
Yes, but there are other ways that you could actually
correct, exactly. And the entire debate within Israeli society is war the only way for you to get them back? And in fact, there is a sizable chunk of people in Israel who say that the way to get them back is as Israel did in the past, which is through negotiations. But it seems as if the Netanyahu government is pursuing the course of war because it has other political reasons.
It's not really concerned about the existing. In fact, what happened earlier is that there was a period in which a certain number of hostages were released. Do you remember that, etc.? Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire. But after that, and they learned that because after that took place, they thought it might be the prelude towards a process in which that would take place. It didn't happen. And what Netanyahu is doing is clearly an indication to him that it's much more important are his strategic political concerns rather than the question of the hostages. And incidentally, by extending the war in Lebanon, he's also pushed back the kind of hostility that was taking place within Israel towards him, because now the country is at war and we have to unite together here. And it's also served as a diversion from the horror of what's happening in Gaza and West Bank.
Before we come to Lebanon, Achin, I wanted to just draw you out a bit more on this, on the positive and the negative ledger side, right? Because I've heard Palestinians argue, including many who are opposed to Hamas, that no matter how we got here, and we've got here by paying a terrible price, right? I mean, over 40,000 Palestinians killed, hundreds of Israeli civilians killed. The fact is that prior to what Hamas did on October the 7th, there was no conversation happening. There was no international discussion at all on the plight of the Palestinians and how to move their right to self-determination forward. Israel, in fact, was continuing to nibble away at Palestinian territory by building more and more settlements. And there was a kind of international, I would say, not exactly boredom, but the fact is that the Palestinian cause itself was not, was languishing, and the U.S. was pushing its Abraham Accords / Israel, India, kind of, this different, new arrangements were being created, including bringing the Saudis on board. So there was a sense in which the political geography was moving in a certain direction that would actually harm the Palestinians and further weaken an already weakened cause. That's the reality prior to October the 7th. And today, the terrain is entirely different.
I already mentioned on the positive side of the ledger, the status quo has been shaken and the issue has come up. But the overall calculation, in my view, is undoubtedly that Israel has gained very considerably in its larger project. Had there been a different kind of a reaction, had there been much stronger action against Israel for what it is doing, because the end result is that even after this and has come up, Israel is carrying out a genocidal campaign and getting away with it.
And the world is doing nothing to stop it.
And the world is doing nothing. Not only that, I mean, recently the Jordanian foreign secretary has talked about how we evolved resistance here. Have the Arab countries and the West Asian countries, North African countries, come together to demand that the countries that have signed the Abraham Accord should withdraw? If they did this would be a political, strategic impact on the United States and Israel. But no. Have they come together to use the oil weapon? No. So the overall situation is that, in fact, Israel finds that actually it can extend itself further and carry on with this project in a way that would have been much more difficult for it to consider earlier on. It was more incremental. Incidentally, one thing that has happened during this period is they have, in a very rapid manner, carried out attacks on the West Bank and extended their support there. And now you have a situation in which you have something like 700 to 750,000 illegal settlers in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, right? And who's stopping it? Is there anything here? So Israel has a sense of it also has problems. What I would say is that the time factor is important. If you're talking about the next, it's shaken it. They have gained ground strategically and politically, but there is the longer term, and in the longer term, the fact that they cannot be like a settler colonial state for the first time means that there is the basis in the longer term for a movement forward that can help to change, but we require a lot of effort, and a lot of things would be required from that. And beyond the point, there's no point now in talking about even whether this is a setback or not, we have to talk about how do we move forward. How does the case now, um, how does the Palestinian cause move in the direction of greater
Right.
justice?
Now, assuming that at some stage Israel is going to stop its attack and bombardment of Gaza,
Hmm.
how do you see what's the end game from Israel's point of view and from the Palestinians after that?
Well,
I mean,
okay.
like let's say that a month from now, the Israelis declare victory in Gaza. They say we've got all our hostages back and we're not going to do anything more. Of course, they would maintain Gaza as a kind of open air prison.
Yes.
Where would things go from there?
Well, not just as open a prison, because now, as far as Gaza is concerned, one can talk about the larger issue later on about what Palestinians must do, generally speaking. But with regard to the question of Gaza, Israel is insisting that they will have the Philadelphia corridor, which separates Gaza
Egypt.
from Egypt, and also a corridor in the middle, which means that the new prison would be even more squeezed and more dense. And it's an open question whether domestically the Israeli government will move in the direction of allowing settlements of Israelis back into the northern part of Gaza. But certainly they will maintain their security control, and therefore it's not going to be quite like the open air prison of the past. Apart from that, if there is at some time a ceasefire, the question of what kind of a governing structure there will be there. And there seems to be a certain tension between the United States and Israel, in the sense that you have the United States wanting to bring in one of the Arab countries, and the UAE has indicated its interest in this, to come in there to also be part of the governing structure there. And they would also want a fig leaf of some kind of Palestinian presence, i.e., Fatah and Abbas, to also be there. The Israelis want to have it their own way. And incidentally, what unites Fatah and Hamas, which is why Chinese could broker that deal, which of course is a very weak deal and so on, is that neither Fatah nor Hamas want a non-Palestinian Arab country to also be present over there. So this is an open question, and we'll see what happens over there. Yeah. So, I mean, that's Gaza.
Yeah.
The larger question, of course, is that let's be very clear. As far as Israel is concerned, it's now clear, and they have a thought, we want the whole of Judea and Samaria, West Bank. Separate Gaza from the West Bank, and let's take as much of it as possible, and let's just move forward. When other countries talk about the two-state solution isn't here. Well, whether you're talking about the two-state solution or a one-state solution, the central question is how do you get there? It's for the Palestinians to decide. And interestingly, more and more Palestinians are recognizing that a two-state solution is not really on, and we should move in that direction.
Yeah.
But the other side, of course, doesn't. Israel, of course, is totally against it. But will, because of what's happened now and the fact that your point about how the Palestinian issue has come, are the other governments, are the United States going to make sure that for peace, that we should have a viable and genuinely just two-state solution? You know what that would require? If the United States wants to put pressure on Israel, it would mean Israel will have to have a civil war. There are 750,000 settlers there. There is no government in Israel which is going to seek to uproot that. And now the situation changes.
And these are all guys who are armed, who have military training.
They've got tens of thousands in the last 1 year in West Bank. And let's not forget, in this whole 20-year period, when all the other countries are saying two-state, they let Israel carry on with this. And Israel will want to.
In fact, since the Oslo Accords, the number of settlers and settlements in the occupied West Bank has maybe grown 4 or 5 times.
Yes. Oslo was Oslo 1 and Oslo 2, 1993, 1994. Between 1993 and 1994, Shimon Peres, who said they're getting a state minus, not even a proper state, they increased the number of the proportion of settlers there between 93 and 94, and it carried on steadily.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's this issue over here. So in a sense, what is a better perspective for that in my particular point of view? I leave it to the Palestinians to decide whether they want to say we have to change the relationship of forces there. But one thing, and this is something that would worry Israel and worry its backers, in particular the United States, is concentrate on ending the apartheid character. Struggle for rights and equality. And one thing I must say also, the Palestinian people are remarkable and courageous people, have not had, except very rarely, the kind of leadership they deserve. You cannot defeat Israel militarily. That's not the way to go. Yes, there is a place for you to use violence when they're coming and killing your home and trying to kill you and all that. But as an offensive strategy, forget about this. Don't think that a repeat of what happened is the way to move forward. Yes, Palestinians feel that at least there's resistance and all that. You can't do that. You have to have a new kind of a leadership which fights in a non-violent manner for equality and rights. And this becomes something very useful. I must admit that it's easier for me to say it because even if they do peacefully, it will not stop Israel from killing many Palestinians. But still, Israel will not be able to use this bogey of our existence as being threatened or anything like that. And many people who are pro the American establishment recognize that if it's a struggle for justice, for equality of rights, and so on, this is actually much more difficult and dangerous. And this would connect three arenas which have to be connected. You struggle for equality and rights in the occupied territories. There is a struggle going on in Israel of the Palestinians for equality. There is a struggle in the dictatorships around them for greater democracy. A struggle of this kind, which talking about democratic rights and justice, has the potential to unite all three. And one of the outcomes that have come from this result, a positive side of the ledger, which I didn't mention, is that the Palestinian diaspora can play a much bigger role than before. So I think that this is the direction to go. In particular, someone has said in the past, and I would repeat it, that the way towards um, uh, the path to Jerusalem would have to probably go through Cairo and Amman. I met uh, Mustafa Barghouti recently in South Africa, and I met someone else, and I asked them, I said, which is the weak spot among the dictatorships in the Arab world in which there could be an uprising, because there's been constant uprisings in this part of the world. And one of them said Jordan, and the other person said Egypt. But there will be upsurges. What has happened is that those upsurges have not stabilized a democratic situation. But if there is a breakthrough of some kind, believe me, the whole situation can change.
Right. Let's switch a little bit now to India and the government of India's attitude towards the war in Gaza. Narendra Modi was one of the first world leaders to publicly stand in solidarity with Netanyahu and the Israelis after October 7th. And even if one cuts him some slack and says, well, that was the first reaction to uh, news that was as it was emerging of hundreds of civilians having been killed and so on and so forth. The fact is that Mr. Modi has not expressed similar pain and anguish about the killing of Palestinians by the Israelis on a much larger scale. Not only that, India was reluctant when the matter was first raised at the UN to support the call for a ceasefire. And it's only a little bit later, by December last year, that the government of India under Modi finally swung around to saying that there should be an immediate ceasefire. India has, according to the reporting that we have carried in the wire, others have too, has continued to sell
Yes.
dual-use items and explosives and others
And
that could be
also,
used for
and
weapons.
personnel to go along.
So these are one of the, India is one of the countries selling military equipment and material to the Israelis, even as they stand accused of committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. India has also, and this surprised many people at one level, and I know that the Indian trade unions took a firm stand against this, but this government, the Modi government, also told the Israelis that we will help you to tide over your labor shortage, because the Israelis cut off access to Israeli labor markets by Palestinians in the West Bank
That's right.
after October 7th, and many jobs then were not being done. And so they turned to countries like India to send labor. And despite the difficult security situation, India has sent tens of thousands of workers.
That's right.
So, by all accounts, India has emerged as one of those sort of steadfast allies of Israel, despite the fact that civilizationally, culturally, historically, for the past 70, 80 years, even before India became independent, the people of India have stood with the Palestinian aspirations. And India was one of the first countries to recognize Palestine. And I remember, PLO had an office in Delhi for years prior to that. Uh, what accounts for this complete U-turn in the attitude of the government of India
Well,
towards Israel and Palestine?
it's been more gradual than just a sudden U-turn. I mean, there's a process that is taking place here. But incidentally, you said that India at the UN called for an immediate ceasefire, or did it just call for a humanitarian ceasefire? I'm not sure.
Well, the resolution said, I think the phrase they used was, I think some of the resolutions spoke of a humanitarian pause.
Yeah.
Others, there are resolutions which have called for a ceasefire.
That's right.
India resisted both initially.
That's right.
And I think by December came around.
All right. Now, of course, as you mentioned, it came out and condemned the terrorist attack in strongest terms, but since then it's never condemned the genocide that is taking place. Lets Israel off the hook for its terrorist campaign that is taking place here. But incidentally, in 2014, Israel carried out Operation Protective Edge, which killed more Palestinians, over 2,500, as compared to what Hamas did. And there was an attempt to get a resolution condemning that, which was not allowed to pass by the Modi government. So even before that, you can see the kind of, and of course, I can give you an indication of how there has been. If you like, after 1992 and the resolution and Narasimha Rao and the recognition, full diplomatic recognitions, the basic stance of the Indian government has been giving lip service to the Palestinian cause and giving money to Fatah, to the PA, and to the UNRWA. That has been the basic stand here. Verbal, we are supported here, but much more concentrating on the relationship with Israel. And I've written about how even the Congress party has done that. But yes, the BJP, Vajpayee government, extended that. And for the first time, Ariel Sharon came prime minister. Incidentally, one should not forget that the first time the two prime ministers of Israel and India met was not when Ariel Sharon came. It was 1985 when Rajiv Gandhi met Shimon Peres at the 40th anniversary of the UN. Just a week or so after a bombing by Israel of the PLO headquarters in Tunis, which killed civilians. And even though India condemned it, that didn't stop the meeting between them. But anyway, the point. So then you had that acceleration. And after you had the UPA and the UP1, two governments, the relationship between India and Israel under the Congress-led UPA and UP2 governments considerably escalated. But then, when Modi comes in, you have a further qualitative escalation at the diplomatic political level. The 2017 meeting.
Also, the purchase of Pegasus spyware from Israel, all kinds of things.
Yeah. 290s, yeah, so many things. Yeah. The diplomatic, politically, a turning point took place when, in 2017, when Modi went to Israel, and for the first time, any top Indian politician did not go to Ramallah, dehyphenating it. In 2018, he goes to Ramallah for 3 hours. And there a very important change took place in the Indian official position, which is that we support the creation of an independent and sovereign Palestine. For the first time, the word united was eliminated, and the idea of East Jerusalem as the capital was eliminated. In other words, there was an indication by the Modi government, which remains here, that if there is a movement towards a worse kind of Bantustan type sort of situation than even Oslo, that's fine with us. So it's really that verbally, and all that you've said in terms of that kind of support is there. What is particularly disturbing, because this is to be expected from the BJP and the RS, there's ideological kinship and affinities of various kinds here. What is disturbing is that apart from the left forces over here, how many of the other parties have been prepared to take a stand against it? And what about the restrictions on support for Palestine in civil society in India?
I mean, we've seen the arrest of people
Yes.
across the country for staging peaceful protests in solidarity with Palestine,
Yes.
which is something which you can't justify in terms of the law
No.
in this country. Forget about anything else.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is the terrible situation. So, it is one of the strongest allies, and of course, Israel knows it. And one cannot ignore the ideological kinship in a certain sense, in terms of both the Zionism and Hindutva being racist and exclusivist conceptions of nationalism.
Right.
And that provides the other aspect is realpolitik.
Right.
That we have to think about our strategic interest and so on. And one of the things about realpolitik thinking, which you do have to understand, because governments think like that, but realpolitik thinking is problem solving. It's not justice seeking. And we all have a choice of whether we want to seek justice. And the early Indian experience of being an anti-colonial power in the early years was an indication of a stronger moral content to its foreign policy in a way, of course, which is completely disappeared.
Right. We haven't spoken of Lebanon and Iran. How worried are you as an analyst about a widening, deepening conflict? Israel may have limited war aims vis-a-vis Lebanon, but everybody in the region now fully expects Israel to respond to the Iranian missile attack with something fierce and powerful, which is bound to then further draw the Iranians out as well. Where do you see that process playing out?
You see, the point is that you have Lebanon and Iran wanting to be limited. Huh? The crucial question is that does Israel want to be limited, and how limited? In fact, Israel is the actor and the others are the reactors in a certain sense. Why did Israel go ahead with this? I would say for two reasons, one domestic, one larger. Domestic, Netanyahu remains in power and he can see the benefits to himself of that, of extending the war to a certain extent. In Lebanon, it's really the question of the southern part, demanding that Hezbollah move north of the Litani River. And they're creating some kind of a buffer zone and having that. Yeah. Incidentally, they've also attacked Syria, as you know. Israel has also attacked Syria. That's there. But this part is about 75% Shia. It's supposed to be security-wise governed by the Lebanese army and the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, which is now under a lot of pressure. What is it going to do when Israel bombarding it? The question is that does Israel in Lebanon just want a kind of buffer zone and will be satisfied with that and resistance, or does it want to go further and engage? Air-wise, at the level of air and all, it can hammer. But is it prepared to take the risk of a ground confrontation there? Now, even if it's not prepared to take a risk there is possibly an uncontrolled dynamic of escalation which can take place in that direction. In the case of Iran, the Iranians have indicated this is what we've done. That's it. What will Israel do? There's a certain tension between Israel and the United States here, but please notice that the United States, generally speaking, throughout this whole period, even it is though it is far more powerful, has been the reactor rather than the actor to which Israel has been the reactor. It's Israel that is actually taking the initiatives.
And Biden at every stage has said we are fully behind you.
Yes,
I mean, whatever.
so it's very interesting, isn't it? So in that respect here, Israel is prepared to hammer Iran and to consider attacking its oil installations and even its nuclear facilities. Biden and all have said no, no, no. Incidentally, Israel was opposed to the Obama deal. The reason why Israel was opposed to the Obama deal was that although the Obama deal prevented a bad situation from getting worse, and even Khamenei is against Islam, we don't want nuclear weapons. Israel is solidly opposed because Israel does not want Iran to even have nuclear energy capacity, because that's dual capacity. In other words, it doesn't want Iran to even have the potential to go in that direction. I don't think that they will attack the nuclear facilities, but I can't say for certain. I don't know. It's really, in a certain sense, a calculation that they will make, whatever discussions they have here. The whole question of whether Trump comes to power and he says, go ahead, because Trump, as you know, was against it. Not that Kamala Harris has been so far any different. In fact, it's the Biden government, and Biden is emotionally much more of a Zionist than even Trump or Harris. But these are things I really don't know. The force that could prevent Israel is the United States from attacking the nuclear facilities. I don't know.
In Lebanon, you could, if we were to apply your positive and negative side of the ledger analogy, it would seem to me a no-brainer that Hezbollah has suffered. In other words, the negative side of the ledger for Hezbollah is much more weighty than the positive side. What began in October as sort of a sign of solidarity, a show of solidarity with Hamas, with rocket attacks into northern Israel, has escalated into a situation where first you had the Israelis sending pagers, booby trap pagers, which wounded or maimed thousands of Hamas cadre. Then you have the killing of Nasrallah and other top leaders of Hezbollah, as far as we know. Uh, this is the kind of body blow that the Hezbollah, folks perhaps didn't, they hadn't had to deal with this for 2 decades, and now it's happened.
No, it's like this. Even here, Israel has been the actor in the sense that you had a situation when, after the attack on Gaza, you have Hamas saying, look, Iran, Hezbollah, do something. Do something. So they felt the need to do something, which didn't really amount to much. The idea that Israel has to evacuate, has to go into southern Lebanon because of the North Israel's 65,000, is ridiculous. Lebanon has, from the very top of Lebanon, missiles that can hit that area. It was an excuse given that they should justify moving in there. And then, of course, things really escalated when you have first the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, a violation of its sovereignty, and again all these pages and all the rest of it that's done, that is doing there. You left both Iran and Hezbollah in a situation where they had to do something. Hezbollah is part of the governing structure in Lebanon. It has an armed force which is stronger than the Lebanese army. But it doesn't have capacity to prevent that kind of killing. But that will also alienate a lot of people in Lebanon. And Israel's calculation is that, isn't this a possible opportunity for us to change the whole relationship of forces in this region in a way that the United States of America will also be happy? And not only will the United States of America be happy, but the Gulf monarchies and others who are much more preoccupied with Iran than others could also benefit there. So these are the larger calculations of thinking that is taking place over here. And Lebanon is basically a reactor to that. So one thing is that I don't see Israel sending its, unless things escalate, sending its troops in the way that it did in 1982 or elsewhere. There is a big difference between its tactical capacities of war fighting and the capacity of its armed forces and soldiers, etc., to withstand losses and all that. So I don't see that. But it's the Israelis, in a certain sense, that are planning what to do, etc.
And let's not forget that whatever Israel is doing, whether it's reacting in a tactical manner or looking for tactical gains or pushing for a more wider sort of re-envisioning of West Asia and the Middle East, the fact is that these actions and operations and this talk of wider war has also deflected attention away from the ongoing genocide
Absolutely.
in Gaza, and I would also add the escalating situation in the West Bank,
Absolutely.
where the death toll and the kind of violation of human rights which is happening on a massive scale, uh, a lot of it is passing below the radar of the international community, such as it is.
Absolutely.
And Israel is getting a free pass.
You're absolutely right. And by the way, has this Indian government made any comment about, oh, Hamas is terrible terrorists, this is a reaction to Israel and all that? Has it made any comment about what's happening to the West Bank? What has it said? No. What is Israel doing attacking the West Bank and extending its? Nothing.
Yeah. Right. So I think we'll end it there, Achin. Just to remind our viewers that it's been 1 year since the war started, and the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza continues. The genocidal situation with over 40,000 people dead continues, shows no sign of ending. Every day you turn on the television and you see new footage, new images of horror, of children being killed, hospitals and schools being bombed, and it does seem as if the world is sitting quietly and allowing this to happen. We at The Wire will continue to try to bring you coverage of what's happening in Palestine, in West Asia, and of course cover the possibility of this wider conflict, keeping all the while this idea that in India, it's important that the government of India take a certain view in favor of peace, in favor of the right of people of Palestine to self-determination, something that the government has moved away from in recent years, but which it needs to be pressured to return back to. Thank you for watching, and do subscribe to The Wire's YouTube channel, and of course, think about making a donation to help sustain our work. Thank you for watching.